Welcome to this edition of Rattling the Bars. I'm Mansa Musa, co-host with Eddie Conway. And before we get started, let me update y'all on Eddie Conway. Eddie Conway is doing great. He's recovering at a remarkable speed, and we hope to have him back in the space in the near future. When we think of education and the education of people or the lack thereof, very rarely do we look at the impact that education will have on changing a person that's in the criminal justice system, or more importantly, the impact that education will have on changing people that are incarcerated. But this is not the case within the Maryland Department of Correction. We have a situation where a prisoner, Demetrius Brown, also known as the Atiba, has taken the initiative to acquire an AA degree. He has taken the initiative to have the discipline to study. He's taken the initiative to put himself in a position financially to make sure that he can get the corresponding course. He's done everything in this line, along these lines, to better himself. But the Department of Correction, Department of Public Safety and Correction Service, has thrown a roadblock in his way and preventing him from not only obtaining an education that might lead to a better opportunity upon his release, but also in this policy that they put into effect will have collateral consequences. Here to talk with me today about this is Victor Wallis. Victor has a political science degree at Berkeley College in Boston. He's been active in working with prisoners' issues since 1970. His book, Democracy Denied, 5 lectures on U.S. politics, has been used to teach classes within prison. Welcome, Victor, to Rattling the Bars.
Thank you, man. It's a pleasure to be here.
Victor, let's start out by giving our viewers and our listeners an overview of Demetrius Brown, also known as Atiba. Who is Atiba?
Atiba is it's hard to describe him. I would say he's a model of someone who is forming himself. He's not only educating himself, but he has built a tremendous prestige, I think, among the prison, a tremendous degree of respect. I would say one of the things that most impresses me about him is the accounts he's given of situations where conflict has arisen and where he has served as a kind of mediator or peacemaker. But the other thing he does also to a tremendous extent is educate other prisoners while he's educating himself. And he's led study groups. It's getting a little more difficult now. He finds the prisoners there now less motivated than when he started, but he's very eager to, let's say, help them educate themselves, obviously with a political thrust, because it's a recognition of the kind of injustices of the system as a whole, which are felt with particular strength in the prisons. But that's a motivational factor, and he builds on that and makes it possible for prisoners to begin to discuss among themselves what to do about this situation that they're in. So I don't know what else. He's from Baltimore. He's been in prison for the last 10 years or so, since he was in his early 20s, I believe.
Right.
And he's highly motivated when he comes out to continue doing constructive work of some kind. I mean, in the sense of whether it's counseling or political work, certainly, but he's very dedicated, I would say, to, let's say, improving himself.
Right.
Right.
And so let's pick up on that. So all things considered, he's one person that has taken the initiative to better himself at the exclusion of anything that's going on within the system. Let's talk about his education. And you spoke on the fact that he's done a lot in terms of educating himself on different levels. Let's talk about his formal education. Prior to coming to prison, what was his formal education?
He graduated from high school several years before he was arrested. That was the extent of his formal education. But in prison, he's done an enormous amount of reading. I mean, like many prisoners, George Jackson was a tremendous inspiration, but he's branched out from there in every direction, especially the history of socialist movements, of popular struggles of various kinds, the history of Black people's liberation movements, and various topics, but stretching very widely. And I would say going into the philosophical aspects of things in depth, I would say.
So, and now, based on this, he wanted to take a corresponding course. So he went about taking this corresponding course. Walk us through what the course is and what type of degree he was trying to get or was planning on getting.
Well, the correspondence course that was possible is through Adams State University, which is located in Colorado. And he's going towards an associate degree. He's just starting it. And the two courses that he's enrolled in right now, one is History of Civilizations, and the other is called the Sociological Imagination. And
this corresponding course, is it funded by the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Service? Are they providing? Do we have a Pell Grant for it?
No, the Correctional Services has nothing to do with funding it. It's private support.
So yeah, he's got private support to get a AA degree, which is 2 years. How much time do he have left before he's released to society?
I would say 3 or 4 years, approximately.
So his plans is to get a degree, or AA degree, that is the credits transferable to your knowledge?
I presume so.
All right, so he's going to get a degree, an AA degree, 2 to 3 years left on his sentence, get an AA degree that's have transferable credits that would allow him upon his release to be able to get a BA degree. Is that correct?
Well, it could count towards a BA degree.
It could count towards a BA degree. So what is the problem with him obtaining this degree or continuing this correspondence? What exactly is the problem?
The exact problem is that all of a sudden, in the middle of this first semester of study, the prison refused to provide proctors for him to take exams for his courses. And this is a service which they previously had done routinely, but without any advance warning. They suddenly stopped the process, and they said that it was because of a decree, in effect, from the Department of Public Safety that prohibited the prisons from cooperating in any way with external correspondence courses. So it set him back tremendously. It was tremendously demoralizing, because here he was doing very well in his courses, and suddenly they've put this roadblock in his way. So fortunately, at the present moment, Adams State may be able to accommodate him and allow him to complete the courses without having proctored exams. But the only reason that they're doing that is that they are still operating under a regimen having to do with the COVID pandemic, which allowed for certain flexibility. But they said when that is ended, they'll go back to insisting that the students take proctored exams, and the proctoring has to be provided by someone in the prison.
And in that regard, the proctor exam, and full disclosure, I was incarcerated for 48 years. I'm familiar with the institution he's housed at, Maryland Correctional Training Center in Hagerstown. So I'm familiar with that system, and I'm familiar with the educational system. But in terms of the offering the proctor, exactly what would that entail? What would that look like? Educate our listeners and viewers on what that actually would entail.
Proctoring just means that you have some person in an official capacity who's sitting there while you're taking the exam, making sure that you're not looking at notes, and setting a time limit for you to answer the questions. That's all it is.
And I'm familiar with that. And the reason why I was asking that, because I've been in that space, and this is really all the proctor does is the system that they had set up when I was incarcerated was you go to the school, they put you in the classroom, and the proctor sit there while you take the exam. When you finish taking the exam, you hand the exam in, and you leave. The proctor, the time it takes for the proctor to do its job is the time it takes for the person that's taking the exam to finish. So
Right.
if the person that finished, if the person can finish in 40 minutes, the proctor take the exam and the prisoner leave. And in most cases, I've known that from experiences that because corresponding courses are rare in the prison system because of the ability for a person to finance it, you have very few people in that environment that would be a classroom size where you might have 15, 20 people, where you have to have a proctor in that regard. But let's dial down on why do you think they're doing this to Atiba? Because you outlined a lot of things that's going on with his character in terms of him being an impactful individual within the prison environment and being a person that's there to educate and raise prisoners' conscience about their environment and try to get them to change their thinking. Why do you think they're doing this to him in particular?
Well, they're not doing it just to him. It's a general ruling that applies to anyone. And there I see it as part of a general phenomenon that's taking place all over the country of making things more and more difficult for prisoners to rehabilitate themselves in every way, especially in the form of disrupting their contacts with people in the outside world. I'm in communication currently with a prisoner in Pennsylvania, one in Virginia. In both those states, in order to write to them, you have to write to an address in Florida where they photocopy it and send it back. Now, I just heard from a prisoner in Missouri. I just got this letter today. He says, the state of Missouri has started a new system where mail has to be sent to a digital scanning system after August 1st. And you'll no longer get mail into the prison. It says all you can send in is books and literature. I mean, it's incredible what they're doing. And I've heard of other states. Well, in Indiana, they've prohibited greeting cards and other places like that. They're doing everything they can to make it more punitive, more isolating for the prisoner to be in the system. They don't recognize, or at least they don't care, that separating someone from society is itself punishment. But they have a kind of philosophy. It's not in their official idea. I mean, correction means you're improving someone, supposedly. But their working philosophy is punishment, 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 and more punishment. And this is one aspect of it.
And we recognize that the prison industrial complex and overall is the new plantation, and the prisoners are the chattel. This is a recognition that we see throughout the United States of America. 2.5 million people are incarcerated. Beyond that point, it's over like 10 million people that's locked into the criminal justice system in the form of parole, probation, the county jail, and detention center. So your observation is correct in regard to this being a concerted effort on the part of the establishment and the prison industrial complex and these bloodsuckers in terms of minimizing or dehumanizing or relegating prisoners into a sense of hopelessness. But in terms of Atiba, how is he responding to, I heard you say earlier that it brought on a sense of depression, but how is he doing thus far in regard to him maintaining his focus and continue to educate himself and others around him?
Well, his immediate response in terms of the courses is that he's writing to his instructors, requesting them to accommodate him and to allow him to complete the course without having to take proctored exams. And for the moment, that's possible in terms of Adams State ruling, but it may not be possible after they lift the special rulings they had during COVID. So he's doing that, but it was a terrible disruption and very demoralizing at first. And so he's apprehensive for the moment the COVID rules get lifted. Adams State will once again insist on having their exams proctored, which means in addition to what I said about their being present and timing, that all the correspondence about the exams is through the proctor. In other words, the institution sends the exam to the proctor, and the proctor sends the exam back to the institution. So there's going to have to be that kind of collaboration. And again, this is not just for Atiba, but for everyone, for anyone who would be taking a correspondence courses. As far as Atiba is concerned, I mean, he's highly motivated, and he's continuing to read and study on his own. But this was a big setback for him. He told me for the couple of weeks after it started, he wasn't sleeping now. He was so angry, really, that they were doing this totally arbitrary interference with what he was trying to do to improve himself.
And we know, and it's a recognition that the prison industrial complex is primarily used for warehousing people, and there are very few institutions in the United States of America, and Maryland, I know for a fact in particular, has a lot of programs, offer a lot of programs, services. So when someone take the initiative to better themselves and have this impediment, it will be demoralized. But I want to look at the collateral consequences of this decision, because, like you say, it affects everybody. Have you looked at it in terms of the overall impact it would have on the Department of Correction in general, or the Division of Correction in general?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, the immediate thing in Maryland, what's important is to put pressure on the Department of Public Safety to lift this ban. This is something that really is a responsibility for anyone who is concerned about the prisoners in Maryland. And in a wider sense, what this kind of practice reflects is a general increase in the repressive responses of those in power to anything in the nature of a threat that they perceive just in people preserving their humanity. I mean, they would love to have the people in prison fighting each other in gangs, spaced out on drugs and so on. What they don't want is purposeful prisoners who are developing a consciousness and who can become effective organizers, both in the prison and later when they get out. And the repressive measures that they're taking are just horrendous. Both this interference with the correspondence by having to send letters to another state, and then only sending the prisoners a photocopy, and then digitizing the incoming mail and so on. And another thing, well, you mentioned some of the things with, well, for example, requiring in some jails, they don't even allow direct visits anymore. You have to do it through video. And there's it's all also a money-making opportunity for these outfits that provide these services. Mm-hmm. And but I was saying also that the repressive aspect is consistent with the wider phenomenon of repression that's manifested in the voter suppression methods, mm-hmm. Preventing people from voting because you're afraid that what they would vote for would be programs and people that would push the society in a more, let's say, just direction, a more redistributive direction, and it would take power away from those with privilege. So the prison system is a part of this larger apparatus, which controls and limits mm-hmm. the capacity of citizens, of ordinary people, working people, to speak for themselves effectively in an organized way, and not just in the form of random protests or mm-hmm. frustrated acts of despair.
Right, and dangerous. Educated prisoner or right. Educated persons is dangerous. Like we know that slaves wasn't allowed to read, and the prison industrial complex being the new plantation and prisoners being the new chattel, it seemed kind of like consistent with the thinking of the establishment, the fascist government, that any person is likely to be more likely to resist the repression and oppression and the dehumanization that capitalists be inflicting on people throughout the world. But Victor, you had the last word on this. What's your last word on this?
Well, yes, just picking up on that point of education, that where education is dangerous to to the ruling elite, to this ruling class, is when it takes the form of consciousness raising among the people who have suffered injustice, and who, especially in the prison context, who can communicate with each other about it. I mean, in a way, the prison is an ideal learning environment because people are surrounded by demonstration or proof of the injustice of the society, and they're thrown together with others who are experiencing the same thing at the same time, and they may have even time to engage in study. So while it's a terrible situation to be put into, there's a way in which it can backfire on those who are doing it. And as people have said, prison can become a school of liberation. I always remember George Jackson's statement that it's not an exact quote, but it's roughly to the effect that prison will either break you or make you indestructible, something along those lines.
Yeah.
And that's educating oneself within the prison context in the light of all these conditions is exactly what's necessary and what's important. But it's also, I think, more generally, education is a basic right, and people shouldn't be prevented from pursuing it. And it's not necessarily the case that every prisoner will educate himself or herself in a political direction, but it's important that this be allowed. And this is part of the process of rehabilitation, of re-entering society.
Mm-hmm. Talk about what can be done to support not only Atiba, but anyone that's confronted with this situation.
I mean, I would say, of course, on the one hand, they should contact I guess, the Department of Public Safety, but whoever oversees the Department of Public Safety and Correction Services, that this is an outrage. So that should be made a public issue in itself. But I mean, in the wider sense, it involves all the general things we talked about, the changes that are needed in the society to, because since this is part of a national repressive trend, it can only be fought politically at the widest level. So people have to get involved in, let's say, in revolutionary struggle of some kind or other, in whatever situation they find themselves in.
Thank you. And there you have it, the real news about the prison industrial complex, continual oppression and repression of people. The new plantation, they are constantly inflicting cruel and unusual punishment on people throughout the United States. Here we have another example of something as basic as education. They want to control that. And Atiba might be an individual, but he's the face of how repressive the prison industrial complex is when it doesn't allow a person to educate himself, to spend his own money or solicit support to educate himself by taking a correspondence course. To block him from doing that, they block him from being able to take the exam and putting a hardship on not only him, but the institution that want to support him. There you have it, the real news about the repressive educational system policy in the Division of Correction, Department of Public Safety and Correction Service in Maryland. Thank you very much, Victor. We enjoyed this conversation. And can you send the information where people can contact Atiba if they want to correspond with him and interact with him?
I will send it to you and you can post it.
Yeah, please, appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Mansa. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Definitely, thank you.